The NFL is a league built on giants. Men who run faster, hit harder, and push their bodies further than almost anyone alive. They're built for punishment, trained for survival, protected by helmets, pads, and billion-dollar contracts. But none of that can protect you from everything. Because for some NFL players, it wasn't the game that took them. It wasn't a dirty hit, a blitzing linebacker, or a torn ligament on Monday Night Football. It was a pond in Louisiana, a boat that never came back to shore. Some of these men were in the prime of their careers. Some had just walked off the field for the last time. Some never even saw it coming. Neither did we. Today, we're telling the stories of 14 NFL players who died in ways that left the entire football world speechless, tragic, shocking, and in some cases, deeply controversial. These aren't just football stories. These are human stories, and they deserve to be remembered. If you are new to this channel, please subscribe to True Crime Zone, and let's keep breathing life into stories that were never meant to stay silent. Let's get into it. Chuck Hughes. We start with a moment that has never happened before in professional football history, and to this day has never happened since. The 24th of October 1971. Detroit's Tiger Stadium. The Detroit Lions are hosting the Chicago Bears in what should have been a routine NFL Sunday afternoon game. With less than 2 minutes left in the contest, Lions wide receiver Chuck Hughes lines up for what appears to be a normal running play. He runs his route, the ball goes elsewhere, and Hughes turns to jog back to the huddle. And then he just falls. Not the way a player falls after a tackle. Not the way an exhausted athlete collapses to catch his breath. He falls straight down, face first, motionless. The stadium goes silent. NFL players from both teams, the Lions and the Bears, immediately recognize something is catastrophically wrong. Bears linebacker Dick Butkus, one of the most feared players in NFL history, frantically waves for medical staff to come onto the field. In that moment, the most intimidating man on the field was desperately trying to save another man's life. Chuck Hughes was 26 years old. He was rushed to a nearby hospital, but it was too late. He was pronounced dead from a heart attack caused by advanced coronary artery disease that had gone undetected. An autopsy revealed that Hughes had arteries so severely blocked that doctors were stunned he had ever been cleared to play in the NFL at all. A blood clot had formed and cut off oxygen to his heart at the worst possible moment. The NFL game resumed after a brief delay. The Lions lost. Chuck Hughes remains the only active NFL player to die during a regular season game. More than 50 years later, that record has never been matched, and no one in the NFL wants it to be. His family never got to say goodbye. Next, Stone Johnson. Before he was an NFL player, Stone Johnson was one of the fastest human beings on the planet. At the 1960 Rome Olympics, Johnson competed in track and field for the United States, reaching the semi-finals of the 200-meter dash. He had blazing speed, elite athleticism, and a future that seemed limitless. The Kansas City Chiefs saw that potential and signed him. Stone Johnson was going to be something special in the NFL. He never got the chance to prove it. During a preseason game in August of 1963, Johnson returned a kickoff and was hit a devastating collision that left him with a severe spinal injury. The damage was catastrophic. He was paralyzed. 23 days later, Stone Johnson died from complications related to that injury. He was just 23 years old. The NFL world mourned a talent that the league had barely gotten to see. Stone Johnson played in only a handful of NFL preseason games. His professional career, measured in weeks, ended before it ever really began. He was an Olympian who became an NFL player and died before most fans even learned his name. That's a tragedy that cuts deep not just because of what was lost, but because of what could have been. Next, Thomas Herrion. The hardest deaths to comprehend are the ones that happen without warning, when everything seems fine and then it isn't. The 20th of August 2005. The San Francisco 49ers have just finished a preseason game against the Denver Broncos. The final whistle has blown. Players are exhausted but relieved. A preseason game is behind them, and the regular NFL season is just weeks away. Thomas Herrion, a 23-year-old offensive lineman for the 49ers, walks off the field with his teammates. He makes it to the locker room, and then he collapses. Emergency responders rush to the scene. Herrion is transported to a hospital immediately, but he cannot be saved. He is pronounced dead. The autopsy reveals that Herrion died from a heart arrhythmia connected to an enlarged heart and cardiovascular disease. Doctors noted that his body mass over 300 pounds, typical for an NFL offensive lineman, placed enormous strain on his cardiovascular system. He had survived the entire preseason game. He had walked off the field under his own power. The locker room should have been a place of celebration. Instead, it became a place of grief. Thomas Herrion's death reignited conversations across the NFL about the cardiovascular risks faced by large linemen, men whose size is considered an asset on the football field but can quietly become a liability off it. He was 23 years old. His NFL career, barely off the ground, ended in the most devastating way imaginable. Next, Derek Thomas. If you watched NFL football in the 1990s, you feared Derek Thomas. The Kansas City Chiefs pass rusher was not just good, he was historically, generationally, otherworldly good. In a single NFL game against the Seattle Seahawks in 1990, Thomas recorded 7 sacks, a record that still stands to this day. 7 in one game, against professional NFL offensive linemen paid millions of dollars to stop exactly that. He was a 9-time Pro Bowl selection. He was the kind of player that NFL quarterbacks had nightmares about on Saturday nights before Kansas City games. Off the field, Thomas was equally remarkable. He founded the Third and Long Foundation, a literacy program that helped Kansas City area children learn to read. He was not just an NFL star, he was a man who understood that his platform came with a responsibility to give back. Then came the 23rd of January 2000. Thomas was driving with 2 friends on an icy Missouri highway when his vehicle lost control and crashed. 1 passenger was killed at the scene. Thomas survived, but the spinal injuries he sustained left him paralyzed from the chest down. The NFL world rallied around him. Teammates visited. Fans sent letters. It seemed possible, maybe even likely, that Derek Thomas, the man who had beaten every NFL offensive line he'd ever faced, would find a way to fight through this too. He didn't get the chance. 16 days after the crash, Derek Thomas suffered a blood clot and died. He was 33 years old. He was weeks away from being inducted into the stadium's Ring of Honor. He never made it. The Kansas City Chiefs retired his number 58 jersey. In 2009, Derek Thomas was inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame, one of the most deserving enshrinees in the history of that building. But the Hall of Fame speech he never got to give, the literacy events he never got to host, the children whose books he never got to sign. That's what the icy highway took. One of the greatest pass rushers in NFL history gone at 33, 16 days after a crash on an ordinary Missouri road. The NFL has never seen another Derek Thomas. It never will. Next, Dennis Byrd. Dennis Byrd was already one of the NFL's most remarkable survival stories before tragedy struck again. In 1992, Byrd was a promising defensive end for the New York Jets when a collision during an NFL game left him with a fractured vertebra. Doctors were not sure he would ever walk again. The prognosis was grim. But Dennis Byrd proved the doctors wrong. Through extraordinary will, grueling rehabilitation, and the kind of faith that moves mountains, Byrd regained the ability to walk. He wrote a book about his experience. He became an inspiration not just in the NFL community, but across the entire country. He had beaten the impossible. Then, in October of 2016, Dennis Byrd was killed in a car accident in Oklahoma. He was 50 years old. The man who had survived a career-ending, life-threatening NFL injury, who had defied medical expectations, learned to walk again, and turned his darkest chapter into a beacon of hope for others, was taken by a car crash on an ordinary road on an ordinary day. The NFL community was devastated. Players who had grown up watching Byrd's story of survival were blindsided. Former Jets teammates released statements of disbelief. Dennis Bird's life was a story the NFL told with pride. His death was a reminder that you can survive the worst the game has to offer and still be taken far too soon. He was a husband, a father, a man who taught an entire league what resilience really looks like. Gone at 50. Next, Marquise Cooper. Marquis Cooper had fought for everything he had in the NFL. He wasn't a first-round pick. He wasn't handed anything. He clawed his way onto rosters with the Oakland Raiders and the Detroit Lions through sheer determination, a linebacker who earned every snap he ever got in professional football. By the winter of 2009, Cooper was still chasing his next NFL opportunity. He was 26 years old, still hungry, still convinced his best football was ahead of him. On the 28th of February 2009, Cooper and 3 friends, including 2 other men connected to the NFL, took a boat out into the Gulf of Mexico off the coast of Tampa, Florida. It was supposed to be a fishing trip, a weekend out on the water, the kind of break athletes take when the off-season gives them room to breathe. The boat's anchor became stuck in rough conditions. When the men tried to free it, the vessel capsized. All 4 men were thrown into the open Gulf of Mexico. Miles from shore, no rescue signal, just cold water and waves, and the kind of fear that no NFL training could have prepared them for. They clung to the overturned hull for hours, then longer. The hours became a day. The sun went down. The temperature dropped. When Coast Guard rescue crews finally located the boats nearly 2 days later, only 1 man was found alive. Nick Schuyler, clinging to the hull, was barely conscious, hypothermic, dehydrated. He had watched the men around him lose their grip on the boat one by one and disappear beneath the surface. Marquis Cooper was gone. His body was later recovered from the Gulf. The NFL community was stunned. Here was a man who had battled for every inch of his professional football career, who had survived every cut, every training camp grind, every hit taken by open water on what was supposed to be a day off. He was 26 years old. Marquis Cooper deserved more NFL Sundays. He never got them. Next, Corey Smith. If Marquis Cooper was the fighter, Corey Smith was the grinder. Smith was a defensive tackle who had carved out an NFL career with the Detroit Lions, one of those players who does the unglamorous work up front that fans rarely notice, but coaches and teammates always appreciate. He wasn't making the highlight reel. He was making the team better. And in the NFL, that matters. By 2009, Smith was also navigating life after his NFL playing days, a transition that is harder than most people outside professional football ever understand. He was 32 years old, and like many former NFL players, he was still figuring out what came next. He was one of the 4 men on that boat in the Gulf of Mexico on the 28th of February, 2009, the same capsizing that took Marquis Cooper. When the vessel overturned miles offshore, Smith found himself in the same desperate situation as his companions. Cold water, open sea, no rescue in sight. Unlike the sole survivor, Nick Schuyler, Corey Smith did not make it. His body was recovered from the Gulf of Mexico after the Coast Guard's search. What makes Corey Smith's story particularly heartbreaking is how ordinary the day was supposed to be. A fishing trip. A few hours away from the grind of post-NFL life, the kind of Saturday that millions of people take without a second thought. For a man who had given years of his body to the NFL, who had shown up, done the work, and earned his place on a professional football roster, it was a cruel and senseless end. Corey Smith was 32 years old. He had an entire second chapter of life waiting to be written. It never got the chance to begin. Next, Will Bleakley. Of the 3 NFL-connected men who died on that February boat trip in the Gulf of Mexico, Will Bleakley carries the most haunting footnote of all. His body was never found. Bleakley was a former NFL player working to get back into the league when he boarded that boat with Marquis Cooper, Corey Smith, and Nick Schuyler on the 28th of February 2009. He had the size, the athleticism, and the drive that NFL teams look for. He hadn't given up on a return to professional football. When the boat capsized in the Gulf, Bleakley faced the same freezing, exhausting, terrifying ordeal as the others. And like Cooper and Smith, he did not survive it. But while the Coast Guard eventually recovered the bodies of Cooper and Smith, Will Bleakley was never found. The Gulf of Mexico simply kept him. There is something uniquely painful about that, for a family, for friends, for anyone who loved him. The other losses, as devastating as they are, come with at least the grim finality of recovery. Bleakley's family was denied even that. The NFL world grieved all three men together when the story broke. But Will Bleakley's story ends in a particular kind of open silence. No remains, no grave, no closing chapter. Just the Gulf, and a family left waiting for a return that never came. He was a former NFL player with more football left to give. The ocean decided otherwise. Rest in peace, Will Bleakley, wherever you are. Next, Glenn Foster. Glenn Foster was a defensive end who played in the NFL with the New Orleans Saints. He was athletic, talented, and by all accounts, a man who cared deeply about his family. But after his NFL career ended, Foster struggled. Those close to him described mental health battles that were difficult to watch and harder to address. The transition out of the NFL, the loss of structure, the loss of identity, the physical toll the game had taken is something dozens of former players have spoken about publicly. In December of 2015, Glenn Foster was arrested in Alabama following a traffic incident. He was held in custody. And then, on the 7th of December 2015, while in police custody, Glenn Foster died. The official ruling was natural causes, specifically a cardiac event. But the circumstances surrounding his death have never fully satisfied those who knew him or the advocates who followed the case. Questions were raised about the level of medical attention he received while in custody, about the conditions in which he was held, and about whether his documented mental health struggles were adequately addressed before his death. Foster was 29 years old. His family has spoken out. Journalists have investigated. The full picture remains murky. What is certain is this: a 29-year-old former NFL player, a man with a young child and a family who loved him, died in a jail cell. Whether every question has been answered depends on who you ask. Glenn Foster's story is one of the most complicated in this video because it sits at the intersection of NFL player, mental health, life after professional sports, and a criminal justice system that failed to protect a man who was clearly struggling. He deserved better. Next, Rashaan Salaam. In 1994, Rashaan Salaam won the Heisman Trophy, the most prestigious individual award in college football. He was electrifying, powerful, and seemingly destined for NFL greatness. The Chicago Bears selected him in the first round of the 1995 NFL Draft. Early in his NFL career, he lived up to the hype, rushing for over 1,000 yards in his rookie season. And then things began to unravel. Injuries slowed him. The pressure of living up to Heisman expectations weighed on him. His NFL career, which had started with such promise, faded faster than anyone expected. After football, Salaam battled depression. In interviews conducted by those close to him, it became clear that the transition out of the NFL had hit him hard: the loss of purpose, the physical pain from years of contact, and the psychological weight of being the guy who used to be great. On the 5th of December 2016, in a park in Boulder, Colorado, Rashaan Salaam died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. He was 42 years old. The NFL world was stunned. Players from his era released statements. Former Bears teammates spoke about a man they had deeply loved. His death was not an accident. It was the end of a long, painful internal battle that the NFL, like most professional sports leagues, was not equipped to address. Rashaan Salaam's story is one of the clearest examples of why mental health support for current and former NFL players is not a nice to have. It is a necessity. He was a Heisman Trophy winner. He was a first-round NFL draft pick. He was a son, a father, a friend. And the weight he carried alone, in silence, was too heavy. Rest in peace, Rashaan. Next, Corey Stringer. August Unust 2001. Minnesota Vikings training camp. Mankato, Minnesota. It is hot. Oppressively, dangerously hot. Corey Stringer, the Vikings all-pro offensive tackle and one of the most dominant linemen in the NFL, is not feeling well. He vomits during practice. His body temperature is climbing to levels that the human body simply cannot sustain. His core temperature reaches 108.8 degrees Fahrenheit. Corey Stringer collapses. He is rushed to a hospital. Doctors fight for hours to save him. They cannot. The next morning, Corey Stringer, 27 years old, a two-time Pro Bowl selection, a man regarded as one of the best offensive linemen in the entire NFL, is dead. The cause? Exertional heat stroke. The NFL was shaken to its core. How had this happened? How had a world-class athlete surrounded by coaches, trainers, and medical personnel died from heat? The answer was uncomfortable. The NFL's approach to heat safety during training camp was dangerously inadequate. Practices were too long, water breaks were too infrequent. The warning signs of heat illness were not being taken seriously enough. Corey Stringer's death changed all of that. His wife, Kelsey Stringer, became one of the most powerful advocates for athlete safety in American sports history. She sued the NFL and the Vikings. She founded the Corey Stringer Institute, which has worked for decades to prevent heat-related deaths in sports at every level, from youth football to the NFL. Today, NFL training camps operate under strict heat safety protocols that did not exist before the 1st of August 2001. Corey Stringer died so that other players would live. His legacy is measured not in touchdowns or Pro Bowl selections, but in the lives saved by the standards his death created. The NFL remembers him, and it should never stop. Next, Jerome Brown. If you want to understand who Jerome Brown was, you need to understand this. His teammates didn't just like him, they worshipped him. Brown was a defensive tackle for the Philadelphia Eagles, a force of nature, a disruptive presence, a player who made offensive linemen question their career choices on every snap. By 1992, he was one of the best defensive tackles in the entire NFL. He had just made the Pro Bowl. The Eagles were building something special around him. He was 27 years old. He had everything ahead of him. On the 25th of June 1992, Jerome Brown was driving a sports car in Brooksville, Florida, when he lost control of the vehicle. The car crashed. Brown and his 12-year-old nephew, Gus Brown Jr., were both killed. The NFL stood still. Eagles players were devastated in a way that went beyond normal grief. Brown was not just a great player, he was the heartbeat of that locker room, the glue, the energy. The man who made everyone around him better, not just on the field, but as people. The Philadelphia Eagles retired his number 99 jersey. They built a statue. His image is woven into the fabric of Eagles history in a way that few players achieve even with full careers. But what makes Jerome Brown's story hit differently is the potential that was never realized. NFL analysts of that era believe he was on a trajectory toward being one of the all-time greats at his position. A Hall of Fame conversation was not out of reach. Instead, he became a memory, a number on a wall, a statue outside a stadium, and a reminder that in the NFL, the most talented players are not immune to the randomness of tragedy on a summer road. Next, Lorenzo Washington. In February of 2021, a winter storm descended on the state of Texas with a ferocity that shocked the entire country. Temperatures plummeted to historic lows. Power grids failed. Millions of Texans lost electricity, heat, and running water for days. And in the middle of all of that, a former NFL player lost his life in one of the most heartbreaking ways imaginable. Lorenzo Washington had played as a defensive tackle in the NFL, spending time with the Seattle Seahawks. After his NFL career ended, he had returned to Texas, a place where the winter, on most years, is mild. During the storm, authorities reported that Washington died from what was believed to be accidental carbon monoxide poisoning. It is believed he was attempting to stay warm using a fuel-burning source indoors, a tragically common cause of death during the Texas power outage, as desperate residents turned to generators, cars, or heaters not designed for indoor use. Lorenzo Washington was in his mid-30s. He had survived the physical demands of NFL competition, the grinding workouts, the massive bodies crashing into each other at full speed. He could not survive a Texas winter storm that turned his home into a danger zone. More than 700 people died in Texas during that February storm. Lorenzo Washington was among them, a former NFL player taken not by anything on the football field, but by a failure of infrastructure and a series of desperate decisions made in the cold dark. His death was a reminder that life after the NFL is not always what we imagine it to be, and that former players remain vulnerable in ways that never make the highlight reel. Next, Joe Delaney. Stop everything, because what we're about to tell you is not just one of the most remarkable stories in NFL history. It is one of the most remarkable stories in American history. Joe Delaney was a running back for the Kansas City Chiefs. In just his second NFL season in 1981, he was named to the Pro Bowl and looked like a player who would define the position for the next decade. Fast, explosive, and with a work ethic that coaches talked about for years afterward. He was quiet, humble, the kind of NFL player who let his performance speak for him. On the 29th of June 1983, Delaney was at a water park in Monroe, Louisiana. 3 children, young boys, got into trouble in a pond nearby. The water was deeper than it looked. They were going under. People nearby froze. No one moved fast enough. Joe Delaney moved. He jumped into that pond without hesitation. Without asking anyone else to go first, without calculating the risk. He could barely swim. By accounts gathered afterward, Delaney reportedly told bystanders something to the effect of, "I can't swim good, but I've got to try." He saved the children. He did not save himself. Joe Delaney, 24 years old, 2-time Pro Bowl selection, one of the brightest young stars in the entire NFL, drowned in a Louisiana pond trying to rescue 3 children he had never met. 2 of the boys were also lost. 1 survived. The Kansas City Chiefs were devastated. The NFL was devastated. The entire country grieved. President Ronald Reagan awarded Joe Delaney the Presidential Citizens Medal posthumously. It is one of the highest civilian honors in the United States. But the Chiefs retired his number 37 jersey. And every year, in Kansas City, people remember a man who could have stood on the bank and watched who could have waited for someone else, someone who knew how to swim and instead chose to run toward the danger. Joe Delaney was not just an NFL player. He was exactly the kind of person the NFL and the world needs more of. He is gone. But what he did on that summer afternoon in Louisiana will never be forgotten as long as there are people who care about courage. 14 names, 14 stories. And every single one of them is a reminder of something we sometimes forget when we watch the NFL on Sunday afternoons. These are human beings. Not just jerseys with numbers, not just fantasy football assets or sports gambling lines, not just highlights on a reel. They were sons, brothers, fathers, friends, men who loved their families, who carried their dreams onto NFL fields, who sacrificed their bodies for a game that the rest of us watch from the comfort of our couches. These are the stories the NFL doesn't put on the front page, but they matter. If you made it this far, thank you for watching. If any of these stories hit you differently than you expected, that's okay. That's the point. Drop a comment below. Which of these stories did you not know before today? I guarantee you're not alone. Like and subscribe if you want more stories like this, the ones that go deeper than the highlight reel. Take care of yourselves out there,